My name is Bill Bagnall. I'm one of the advisory board members for Build the Era, and we are an organization made up of an all-volunteer organization, made up of folks that came from Pete's campaign and then other campaigns, brought together with the idea of advocating for and maybe making the U.S. Department of Transportation more understandable and relatable and understand its role in your daily life. And we are an education and advocacy organization. And our goal is for presentations like this, for you to leave and say, okay, I learned more about this particular issue, and maybe as importantly, learned how I could advocate for this to be implemented in my town, in my community, in my region, in my state. So that's what we're hoping to do. And with that said, I'm going to be quiet and introduce Jonathan French and let him take it away.
Thanks, Bill. So to understand why we have the National Roadway Safety Strategy, first we need to understand the road user death crisis in the US. You can kind of see from these graphics, fairly somber here, that when we have 350,000 people who've died on our roads in the past decade, and in 2020, almost 39,000 and over 6,000 pedestrians, you can see that this truly is a crisis. And unfortunately, these numbers are expected to grow even higher in 2021. So we haven't got the full numbers yet from the last months of the year, but once those come in, those are expected to be even higher than what we're seeing in 2020. So we're going to look at some charts that show the trends of where we were and kind of the trend that we're on right now when it comes to roadway safety. So basically from the 1970s, roadway deaths have really been decreasing. They were, really high in the mid 1970s, had really peaked at that point, and have slowly declined, basically right around until 2010, 2011, and kind of flatlined a little bit, went up again in 2015 and 16. But now you can see that dramatic spike from 2019 to 2020. And overall, you're looking at a 7.2% increase from 2019, 23% increase per mile driven, 23% increase among Black people, 20% increase among involving persons ejected from a vehicle, 18% increase among ages 25 to 34, 15% among passenger vehicle occupants not wearing seatbelts, 15% among ages 16 to 24, 14% increase on 35 to 44, 11% increase in speeding related crashes, and 9% increase in crashes with police reported alcohol involvement, and 9% among motorcyclists. So we're seeing all these increases across the board, and you can see that from the statistics here. And if you look at this graph, I mean, this really illustrates, especially on the vulnerable user side, vulnerable user being a pedestrian or a cyclist, basically a non-motorist. You can see kind of that baseline of 2010 and how those numbers have spiked to the point where you're looking at almost a 45% increase from 2010 for the vulnerable user fatalities that we have now. And looking at that kind of on a world stage, this chart right here is a chart from the World Health Organization, basically comparing countries for a road user death rate per 100,000 population. And you look at these countries on the right here. So you have Sweden, the UK, the Netherlands, and Australia. And Australia, the road user death rate's under 5, and the Netherlands, the UK, and Sweden, it's all under 4. And here's the United States over here, right around 13. So, you can see just here in the data how we compare with the rest of the world. And these are 2019 numbers, mind you. So we're not even talking 2020 or 2021. So chances are we're not even on this page of the chart anymore. So really, this should be embarrassing. It should be unacceptable. But it also has a huge financial cost. If you look at just basically the cost of a fatal crash, around 1.7 million, and you take those numbers that we have, you're looking at potentially a $70 billion cost each year for road traffic deaths, for a human and economic cost. So, how do we change this? And that's why with USDOT and Secretary Pete Buttigieg and the Biden administration have come up with this National Roadway Safety Strategy. And it's the kind of the groundbreaking thing here is that USDOT has finally adopted that zero road user deaths is their vision. Also looking at a formal adoption of a safe system approach, and we'll talk about what that is. And just with the Biden administration priorities out there, they always want to look at addressing climate and equity, of course, in anything that they do. And then there are specific departmental actions as part of this safety strategy that you'll see to address those elements of the safe system approach, and we'll go through those. So talking about the history of a safe system approach, this isn't really anything extremely new. It was first described in multiple reports by the Organization for Cooperation and Development, or OSED, their International Transport Forum, and also by the World Health Organization between the period of 2004 to 2017. They had several meetings, several different forums, and they were talking about this and issued multiple reports. And you can see those 4 countries, Sweden, UK, Netherlands, and Australia, all adopted the safe system approach. The US did not. Parts have been incorporated, but it fully hasn't been adopted until basically right now with this, through the bipartisan infrastructure law. It actually defined a safe system approach and vulnerable road user for the first time. But this National Roadway Safety Strategy finally puts it, in the limelight. It has USDOT adopt it and developing that strategy to address it. So there are 6 principles for a safe system approach. And the first one, and these are all kind of self-explanatory, but basically the deaths and serious injuries are unacceptable. Basically, you don't want to see any crashes, but the safe system approach really prioritizes that elimination of crashes that result in death or serious injury. The second one, humans make mistakes. I think we all know this, but basically, if we know people make mistakes, then the transportation system needs to be designed and operated to accommodate that and to basically recognize that. And there needs to be, some sort of level there that recognizes that in all the elements of that system. Humans are vulnerable. And this is something, that I think a lot of people don't, really quite understand. And we'll go through kind of some examples here about, how vulnerable people really are. Our bodies really have that limit for tolerating certain forces. So, basically before a serious death or injury occurs, our bodies can only take so much in a crash. Responsibility is shared. All stakeholders, including government at all levels, your industry, nonprofit, researchers, and even the public have some shared responsibility to protect against fatality and serious injury. Safety is proactive. We're looking to address these issues before we have these crashes and react afterwards. You want to address it before you have those serious issues where you have to do something. And finally, redundancy is critical. All parts of the transportation system have to basically protect against serious injury and death, basically because if one of these particular things, one particular safe element fails, then you have to have the other ones back it up. And we'll go through the actual elements of the safe system approach here next. So you have 6 principles. You have 5 different elements. You have safe road users, safe roads, safe speeds, safe vehicles, and post-crash care. So we'll talk about how each one of these is kind of spelled out in the strategy. So first, looking at safe road users, this is just a chart here showing in 2019 of the fatalities that occurred using risky behaviors. And if you think about the number of fatalities in 2019, probably around 35,000 or so, you can look at those and see that 10,000 of those involved intoxication. And another 9,500 or so involve speeding. And these can overlap a little bit too. So, you can have multiple situations with a fatal crash. Another 9,500 who weren't wearing a seatbelt. You have 3,000 for distraction. And something that we don't talk a lot about, but is an issue, is that we had about 700 crashes, fatal crashes involving a drowsy driver. So drowsy driving is an issue, just like distracted driving, just like speeding, intoxication, and not wearing a seatbelt. So it's one of those risky behaviors that we need to address. So what is USDOT doing to address safe road users? First, leveraging funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law for behavioral research and interventions. And that's going to be basically carried out by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And implementing USDOT rules to crack down on repeat commercial drug and alcohol offenders, commercial licenses. Working with states to improve the accuracy of non-commercial license records and finding opportunities to take unsafe drivers off the road. And giving some education to those repeat offenders of impaired driving. Supporting training to enhance equity in law enforcement. Encouraging states to apply for a grant program that funds race and ethnicity of driver for traffic stop information. And increasing commercial motor vehicle enforcement in high crash locations. So that's what's in there. USDOT has quite a bit there, but there's only so much they can do. There needs to be sort of a local effort. And one of the things that, I'd really like to see, and I think, and this is an example here of a city that's actually doing it, is universal road user education. We have driver education, really kind of what we think of how we're educating users, but we really don't have, system-wide, across the US, a universal program for road user education, including, all users, not just drivers. And the Safe Routes Philly, which is part of the Vision Zero Action Plan, and I'll post that, we're going to post that link in the chat so you can take a look at that. They actually came up with curriculum for their elementary and high school to do some of these programs, and they created that in 2020. So they're actually training teachers, educators in traffic safety education. And they plan to provide technical assistance to 12 elementary schools and provide additional training for pre-K, middle, and high schools. And then once these kids are trained, there's a Vision Zero Youth Ambassador program where they can actually go back to their communities with this information and try to actually advocate and affect change in their own communities. So this is just a, kind of a groundbreaking plan compared to how we usually see, road user education here in the United States. And it's a model, I think, you're probably not going to see the results until really down the road but at least you're getting the information to the people that need it basically at the age when they can absorb the most and really kind of set behavior. When we're looking at kids in their, in teenage years, things like that, behaviors have already been set. And if you're trying to do it through adulthood, that's even later. So, and that's what these countries, as I was mentioning, kind of those three countries in Europe, they subscribe to this idea of giving that traffic education and integrating that into curriculum at an early age. So it's great to see this happening in Philadelphia. So safe roads, as you can see here, you can see that, if you're thinking of the fatalities that we had in 2020, you can see that the majority of those were not on our interstate highway system, but on non-interstate arterials and collector and local roads. And the next slide here really shows kind of that urban, the rural issue that we have. You have 19% of the population, 30% of the vehicle miles traveled, yet 45% of the fatalities. So you have that imbalance there that needs to be addressed. I mean, rural roads and rural road safety is a real big issue. So USDOT is looking at completing the rulemaking process from the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or the MUTCD, identifying further changes not possible via rulemaking, and updating it to promote safety, inclusion, mobility of all users, and to also protect vulnerable road users. Using all the federal funding resources they have to support planning, design, and the implementation of safer roads and streets in all communities, including the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and the brand new Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program that was part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And they're going to be supporting states and municipal planning organizations because there's a new requirement also in the infrastructure law that they have to use planning funds to develop complete streets policies and plans. And you're going to hear a lot about complete streets, and basically that's the integration of all users, not just cars, not just, so you got bikes, you got pedestrians, everybody using the street together and inclusively. Launching a comprehensive complete streets initiative and providing technical assistance to communities of all sizes. Incorporating complete streets criteria in those grant programs and also in the emergency relief manual. So this is something, the emergency relief manual is what agencies use when there's been some sort of climate disaster, like say a road washes out or something like that, and they have to use these emergency funds to build it back. Well, now they actually have to consider complete streets as part of that, meaning they have to make sure that all users are integral into what gets rebuilt. Incorporating lighting into complete streets implementation. So lighting is a key design factor in roadway upgrade projects. Now, lighting is something from a design perspective that has only been put in certain areas like intersections or interchanges or things like that. So having it be part of an integral factor in kind of all roadway upgrade projects is kind of an interesting development. So, obviously at night, if people are walking along the side of the road and things like that, having that illumination would be important. So we'll have to see kind of what that exactly is. It's kind of vague right now in here, but actually having it to putting it into complete streets, so it's actually part of that package, is kind of an interesting development. And also involving transit providers and complete streets implementation to support safe walking, biking, and rolling to stops and stations. Now this makes sense. People aren't just using these roads to drive. They need to take these roads to be able to get to transit areas, to locations where they can, make those connections. So they need to be safe in whatever mode they use to get there. Improving state performance on achieving safety performance targets using a focused approach to safety, other technical assistance, and making sure that there's constant or improved performance for every safety measure. And elevating the transportation performance management dashboard to share state information on performance targets and progress toward those targets with state executives, Congress, media, and the public. Now, when you see transportation performance management dashboard, that definitely makes me think of Secretary Pete. And for those who don't know what that is, it sits right here, right out on the Federal Highway website. And you can take a look here at any state and see kind of what they're using for performance measures. But, some of the states have different ones, but, they're really, you're looking at 2017 data here. It hasn't been updated for 2019. So, this really does need a big overhaul. And from what I remember of the secretary when he was mayor in South Bend, dashboards and public reporting was extremely important to him. So I can only imagine that this will be, quite a robust piece of information for folks to take a look at to see how states are doing with those safety measures. And then promoting and adding noteworthy safety practices in the noteworthy practice database to aid state and local agencies. And again, this is another one of these kind of obscure websites that kind of lives within Federal Highway. Again, if you look at some of these, we'll take a look at New York, for instance. So here are all the different things that they've done and have documented on how they've improved safety with various initiatives that they've decided to take on. And here's one for safety cameras, for instance. So you can see those here. And some of these might be, some states have done some things that may be a little bit outdated to kind of where the administration's going. So it remains to be seen if those will remain or how that goes. But this is kind of the compilation of each state and what they've tried. And I think if we could also throw those links in the chat too, just if people wanted to take a look at those.
I put those in there. So
very good. Thank you, Bill.
Of course.
So again, what's missing? We're looking at, we've got all these things that USDOT is going to do, but what does a safe road actually mean? And really what it means is a reduction in kinetic energy. And going back to physics, high school physics here, kinetic energy is basically any body in motion has energy related to its mass and speed. So if you can slow something down, you can reduce the kinetic energy. So basically, what slows things down? And Rhonda is absolutely correct. So roundabouts actually reduce kinetic energy with that reduction in speed because they have a change in vehicle trajectory. Compared when you look at a signalized intersection, anybody can go straight through it. There is no change in trajectory. When you get the green light, you just go straight through it. And unfortunately, when you see red light running, the same thing happens. The vehicles potentially could be traveling 35, 40, 45 miles an hour, on that straight trajectory and not be reducing speed. And when you have that higher kinetic energy, you have the greater chance for serious injury or death in a crash. Federal highways yet to adopt the roundabout as the preferred design for intersections, while states like New York, Washington, and Alaska have already done so. Roundabouts have actually been mentioned in the bipartisan infrastructure law as providing safety for all road users. They've been actually given as an example multiple times. If you look at the original safe system approach documents on FHWA's website, Carmel, Indiana, folks who don't know about that town or city, they've got actually over 140 roundabouts now and growing. And they were actually cited as being an example of a city that used a safe system approach. So basically, in my personal opinion is that we don't really need another signalized intersection location in the US. We've already got 300,000 of them already, when we could be using roundabouts and roundabout corridors to actually lower speed, reducing that kinetic energy, reducing that chance for serious injury and death, while keeping the mobility available for all users. So really, you're not seeing that specifics in this safety strategy, but I'm hoping that states do employ more roundabouts across the country. So looking at safe speeds, here's a quote from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development again. Speed is at the heart of a forgiving and road transport system. It transcends all aspects of safety. Without speed, there can be no movement, but with speed comes kinetic energy. And with kinetic energy and human error come crashes, injuries, and even deaths. So that pretty much kind of says it in a nutshell of why speed and safe speed, is so important to roadway safety. And if you don't believe it from this quote, I mentioned we were going to see an example of vulnerability. Well, this next slide will show you just that. So here's what we're looking at here. Basically, if a person's hit by a vehicle going at 20 miles an hour, you have about a 90% chance of surviving a crash. At 30 miles an hour, it's a 60% chance of surviving a crash. At 40 miles an hour, it's only a 20% chance of surviving a crash. So basically, just by lowering that speed limit from 40 to 20, you go from a 20% chance of survivability to a 90% chance of survivability. And even looking at, even looking at from a 20 to a 60, that's still a fairly significant reduction and significant change in survivability. So speed really is critical to vulnerable users, just because of that survivability. And that's something that I think, people aren't really getting right now in any sort of education. If you're not taking driver's ed, or you're not seeing it, it may seem like common sense, but when you see it laid out like this, it's really striking to see the difference in speed and the effect on the human body in a crash. So USDOT is looking to update and lead implementation of a multimodal speed management program with new guides and stakeholder relationships. They're looking to develop and improve the information available for setting speed limits through proven safety countermeasures and the METCD. And this is a big one here, clarifying the applicability of 85th percentile speed criteria. 85th percentile speed criteria is pretty much almost universally used by states to set speeds. And what that means is that basically, if you have a bunch of vehicles, if you have a speed limit that's posted, and you have a speed study, and you have a bunch of vehicles that all of a sudden all drive faster enough so that the 85th percentile goes up, then the speed limit would go up. So in some states, kind of bind their cities and towns to have to use that 85th percentile speed, while some states are able to actually change it. Some localities are able to change it themselves. So that's something that legislative wise, some localities and some states are going to have to take a look at potentially. But basically, FHWA guidance and regulations are going to be revised basically to set context appropriate speed limits, and also creating roadways. Again, this goes back to the design, to self-enforce speed limits. Because if you go into a built-up area and it looks built up, and your lane widths are reduced, you have kind of a lot of like on-street parking, things like that, that contextual design, that's going to govern speed limits, because people aren't going to want to drive faster in those areas. So that's what you're talking about when creating roadways to kind of self-enforce the speed limits, and the geometrics of it too. When we say talk about roundabouts and curves and things like that, really looking at the context. So here's another controversial item, promoting speed safety cameras as a proven safety countermeasure. This was just added in 2021. The bipartisan infrastructure law allows for funding for cameras at work zones and school zones only with safety funds, but they're looking to make funds available through discretionary grants, and also potentially behavioral safety programs to pilot automated enforcement or strategies focused on speed design to ensure equitable application. And equitable application is kind of the key. Speed cameras, the real controversy for here is because some jurisdictions have used them directly to fund law enforcement, and some cameras have been disproportionately basically catching folks in Black and Latino neighborhoods. So they've kind of, in those neighborhoods, they've borne kind of an unequal burden of those costs and those fines. My state, Maine, actually banned all cameras in 2009, basically because the reasoning given was the thought that they'd be used to fund government instead of actually used as a deterrent for red light running or speeding. And they were actually cited in the bill that another reasoning given was that they were increasing rear end collisions, basically because people were trying to suddenly stop if they were going to be caught, running a red light. So, but they've also had shown to really have a benefit in reducing speed. Countries that have been using them for a long period of time in Europe, and also certain states have been using them and have been finding success in reducing speed. So there is still controversy around this, but it is something that USDOT plans on promoting as a proven safety countermeasure. So what's missing? Again, going back to kind of local speed limit setting. And the city of Portland, Oregon, and there'll be another link in the chat here so you can see kind of the development there. But basically, they decided to reduce their speeds on most of their residential streets to 20 miles per hour from 2018 to 2019. And so now 76% of city streets are now 20 miles an hour maximum speed limit. And what this did, the Portland State University did a study on it, but it lowered it reduced speeds greater than 25 miles an hour by 15.9%, greater than 30 miles per hour by 33.6%, and greater than 35 miles an hour by almost 50%. So if you think about that, and you think about that going back to that graphic and showing the difference between, that 40 miles an hour and 20 miles an hour, you've increased the survivability of vulnerable road users in a crash just by doing that lowering of the speed limit. Now, there's obviously more that can be done with geometrics and things like that, but just by lowering the speed limit, there's been that effect to increase the survivability of those users if they're ever in a crash. So going to safe vehicles now, this is just a chart here showing the different innovations from 1960 to 2012 in vehicle safety. And you can see seatbelts by far, almost 330,000 lives from 1960 to 2012 were saved by seatbelts. You look at airbags, almost 43,000 lives. Looking at side impact protection, 33,000 lives. And child safety seats, 10,000 lives. So vehicle technology is really important to keep up with that because it does. We've proven it. These advances in vehicles are saving people's lives. But there does need to be kind of an organized strategy here. So USDOT is looking to update proposals to develop or update consumer information on vehicle safety performance through the New Car Assessment Program, or NCAP. And they're going to be looking at safety features inside and outside the vehicle, a pedestrian protection system, understanding of the impacts to pedestrians, specific considerations for children, adding automatic emergency braking and lane assistance, and also identifying promising areas of vehicle technology such as alcohol detection systems and also detection of distracted driving. Providing that NCAP roadmap for vehicle improvements over the next 10 years. And then updating the Moroni consumer label, which is that window sticker that you see in a new vehicle, to include crash avoidance also next to crashworthiness information. And the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration may also consider adding information for features that provide mitigation of risks for those outside the vehicle. There'll be new rulemaking to require automatic emergency braking and pedestrian automatic emergency braking technology on all new passenger vehicles. And new rulemaking to require automatic emergency braking for all heavy trucks. And there'll be a consideration of rulemaking to establish safety standards that require passenger vehicles to have that advanced impaired driving technology. And to issue a final rule to upgrade requirements for rear impact guards on new trailers and semi-trailers. So there's, there are different guards. There's a rear impact guard. So if a tractor trailer is in a collision, obviously those exist so that the vehicle doesn't go underneath the tractor trailer. But then you have these side guards too, which is also an issue in a crash. Unfortunately, there isn't information here for any upgrades in that regard. So there's more work to be done there. And requiring auto manufacturers to provide notice when there is a crash involving automated driving systems and to create a public database of information regarding that. This is kind of a big one because we've heard a lot about these autonomous vehicles and also these automated driving systems, which basically make it seem like you can go on autopilot. And that really isn't the case. So basically requiring manufacturers, if they have those systems, if there's a crash involving one of those, then they need to notify the public and make sure that the public is aware that the system has malfunctioned. And then timely investigations in emerging vehicle safety issues due to deployment of new technology. So again, auto manufacturers can come up with all this brand new technology that says it does all these things, but if it creates a vehicle safety issue, then those are going to be investigated so that the public is made aware and the public is safe. So what's missing here, and this is something we've heard a lot about, is vehicle dimension safety standards. And you can see it right there. Vehicles have grown to the size of World War II tanks. I mean, you look around, you look at these SUVs and these giant trucks, you really see it. And if you look at the data, looking at Seattle collisions here, you look at the fatal collisions and non-fatal collisions, you can see quite a bulk of those for the fatal collisions were those larger cars, those SUVs, those vans and pickups. So the data shows that these bigger vehicles are being involved more and more in fatal collisions. Now, there seems to be kind of that over-reliance on technology instead of just looking at just the sheer physics. You're looking at these avoidance systems, these collision systems and things like that. But basically, you've got these big vehicles and you've got that kinetic energy, and that's why you're having these crashes. So depending on this technology isn't necessarily a good thing. You'll notice that vehicles in Europe are generally smaller than the US. Now, that's really due to the road widths, but that really gives them that safety advantage, that added safety advantage for vulnerable road users because their vehicles are smaller. Now, the good news is that with this big push toward EVs, they need to be a certain size, basically to have the aerodynamics so that they can maximize battery life. So that may actually naturally shrink the size of vehicles again from what we've seen from these internal combustion engine vehicles. So maybe we'll start to see, the vehicle size actually decrease without actually having to put forth, actual intentional effort into decreasing the size. But, right now it is a big issue is that, when we're having World War II tanks rumbling around the roads here, people are at risk. And what's also missing, this has come up recently, is that basically that the crash test dummies that are out there really are male focused. And the female drivers that actually, the crash test dummies that they exist, one, aren't representative, and two, aren't even used as drivers sometimes. And you can see that headline's from 2019 from Consumer Reports. And this one's from 2021 in Discover Magazine. So this has been an ongoing issue. You can see that basically, they're using a dummy that's 4'11" and 108 pounds to represent a female passenger or driver, and that really doesn't represent, the average female today. And so 65 Congress people signed a letter urging Secretary Pete and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to update the female crash test dummy specifications to be more accurate. And Michigan Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence is actually leading this charge. So finally, post-crash care, and really you're looking at, the number one thing is that access to emergency and trauma care is really critical to crash survivability. You look at these statistics here, 20% of trauma deaths are preventable if you can get the care to that victim. More than 1/3 of serious injured crash victims, however, are not taken directly to a level 1 or 2 trauma center. And if they are, they get a 25% increase in the odds of survival if they're taken to a level 1 trauma center. So, you see those statistics and see how important that access to the emergency care is. But you think of USDOT and you're thinking, okay, so what can they actually do about this, considering, they don't really have an overview of emergency services and hospitals and things like that. But what they can do is they can partner. And what's proposed is to develop and implement outreach plans for EMS personnel for on-scene and traffic incident training, advanced traffic incident management training and technology targeted at improving responder and user safety, expanding the use and support of the National EMS Information System by funding research and data quality improvements, and improving the delivery of EMS throughout the US in collaboration with the Federal Interagency Committee on EMS and the National EMS Advisory Council, focusing on shortening those ambulance on-scene response times, making sure those emergency crews are getting to the scene, as quick as possible. So you've seen all those things that's in the National Roadway Safety Strategy, but what you don't see is basically that, USDOT can't really do it alone. Stakeholders need to do their part. as roadway users, we must do our part. And you're going to see more to come from USDOT for stakeholders to take certain actions. But here's a few things that you can do right now that you don't have to wait for USDOT. And basically, the first question to ask is, has a Vision Zero or Safe System plan been drafted in your community? And if not, now's the perfect time to do that. To get with your city council or town select board and talk about, is there some sort of plan to get us, seeing as the country's going to zero, what are we doing to try to get there? And asking your local school board to potentially start integrating road user education into the pre-K through 12 curriculum. You're seeing all over the news about parents getting involved in school boards kind of for the wrong reasons. But in this regard, you're looking at, potentially starting a culture of safety, in the school for the users at a younger age, and really getting to develop that, for the rest of their life. But it's important, it really does have to happen at that local level for it to really start kind of developing and probably going nationwide, So we've seen it in Philadelphia. So if Philadelphia can do it, as far as I'm concerned, any city, any town can start looking at that. And the last part is there is grant money available. So please encourage your state and local officials to go after it for projects in your community. There is a lot of grant money available for cities, for towns, for states to go after to improve their community and improve the safety and save lives all across the country. And for more information on the National Roadway Safety Strategy and also the Safe System approach, there's the website there. We'll also drop that in the chat so you can see that. But with that, I will take any questions that you may have.
Well, Jonathan, that is a sobering amount of information. And one of the questions that was here earlier, and please, anybody that has questions, drop them in here. But why the big jump that we saw in one of your first slides in those numbers? Any thoughts on that?
It really goes back to 2020, of course, was the start of the pandemic. You had less people on the roads, you had less congestion, and really you had a lot of unsafe behavior out there. By drivers, but really by all users. We're exercising unsafe behavior because there weren't as many people around. Speeding was a big one. With less vehicles on the road, it became, speeding became a real big issue. So, and then again, we're seeing it. We're seeing again this spike in 2021 as well for the same reasons. So now that's why we have this National Roadway Safety Strategy to really trying to curb these behaviors, and get us on the path where we need to be, back, toward zero instead of inching, further and further up the chart.
Definitely. Anybody have any questions? You can unmute yourself or you can drop it in the chat.
I dropped in the chat one. I was wondering if there were any stats on motorcycle fatalities. You always see those signs, look twice, save a life, and I was just wondering.
Yeah, what I did see was, like I said, that there was that 9% increase in 2020 over 2019. Not sure what those statistics were for 2021 at this point, but there has been an increase in motorcycle fatalities. What those numbers are exactly, I don't have those at the moment.
Thank you, Tracy.
Hey, Jonathan, I was wondering about the dashboard that you had up there and the USDOT plans to kind of update that. Do you know, or was there any information in the stuff you were looking through that would give you an idea on when they plan on getting that more current for the purposes of seeing that data and kind of more current data than what they have?
Yes, let me take a look 1 second here.
Okay, I just didn't know.
But
if it
yeah,
was
they actually did.
for it.
They laid it out. If you go back and actually you can download the safety strategy and take a look at it.
Oh, okay.
They've kind of got who they've assigned these various parts and pieces to and the deadlines that they've set. Let me take a look at this one real quick for the dashboard. (2024).
2024. That's pretty soon. So that's not bad. Great. Thank you.
You know, Jonathan, I wanted to piggyback on something you mentioned, that folks here in this call and in other groups should advocate for this. And to piggyback on what you mentioned in Portland, Oregon, when PBOT, Portland Bureau of Transportation, rolled this out, the Safer Streets, the community got behind it and a local artist got behind it and creating these free signs or very low cost signs that you could get. And I dropped a link in the chat and you can see them. And the nice thing is I'm starting to see them pop up all over town in different neighborhoods. And that is part of what I would say is part of the involvement that you can have to get the word out and to publicize these streets.
Absolutely.
I was just wondering, Bill, too, since you lived there, I mean, was there any pushback against this? Was it controversial lowering the speed limits that much? Because I'm thinking of some of the town meetings I've been to, and I can just see people like, yeah, you know, so.
Well, I think that my take, I live in the downtown core, not in a residential neighborhood. So my perspective can be different. But from what I understand, you know, it was pretty, I don't think it was terribly controversial. I think that it rolled, and I think maybe one thing Jonathan might attest to this as well is there was a lot of testing. There was a lot of, you know, a little bit of trial and error, and the use of those candlestick devices in the road, or you know, the sand things, and how they did it. But I did think it was a combination of awareness coming down from PBOT, but also coming out from residents, especially parents, you know, with kids that, you know, were getting hurt or killed on the streets because of unsafe drivers. So. Anybody else have any questions or anything here? I just want to remind everyone that we will record this. We would appreciate it if you would share this, if you found it informative. Share this with your groups, your local organizations, and your friends that are not on social media. Send them a link to it. Because again, so many people are interested in this topic and want to see safer streets. And I think the historic nature of the effort that's coming from Washington and the U.S. Department of Transportation is something that could change our country. And it won't happen overnight, but it will happen if we all get behind and support it and advocate for those dollars. Jonathan, do you have anything else you want to say before we?
Well, it just to echo you, Bill, it's going to happen at the state and local level. I mean, that's where you're going to see these projects. That's where you're going to see these efforts. And that's where people are going to need to get involved and have the opportunity. As I mentioned, you know, kind of, you know, you wouldn't think going to your school board, you know, or you know, going to, you know, local council meeting or something like that and talking about speed limits, you know, and lowering them instead of raising them. Because most people think, hey, you know, sometimes people think they're too slow or things like that. So, you know, that, you know, the mindset's changing, and, you know, it's going to take literally all of us to adopt this strategy to make it successful, just like it was in those countries. And I think, you know, if we commit to this, you know, if this country really commits to this, puts the resources behind it, and this becomes, you know, part of our lives and something that we all want to change, then we'll see ourselves, you know, kind of go more toward, you know, inching up into that area where we're not having, 14 deaths per 100,000 people, getting closer to where we should be, which is zero. I mean, that's ultimate. That's the ultimate goal. But we've got to set a target, and we've got to put resources and, the initiatives and, put the people behind it and put the work behind it to achieve that goal.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for a fantastic presentation tonight. And just a reminder as we finish that Build the Era is here for you to help with education and learning about resources that are available at your state level in the city. And if you walk or drive or roll or any other mode of transportation through a city or love someone that does, then this is an important topic. And we're glad you're here tonight. We're glad you took the time to understand and learn about this. And please stay with us as we continue to delve into these topics. Next month, we will be having a presentation on bicycle safety from Bike Advocacy Group. And hope to see you then. Watch our social channels, watch our email. And most importantly, thank you for being here. We appreciate your time. I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much, everybody.